Boker Tov, everyone. Wonderful to see you all. Today we are going to learn about the Parsha Beha'alotecha. And someone had asked, what does that word mean? It's from the word aliyah, to go up. The context of our Parsha is laws to the Kohanim, the priests, and the first mitzvah is given to Aaron when he goes up to light the menorah. But what we're going to focus on today is a rather, or an often overlooked mitzvah known as Pesach Sheni. Now, the calendar, the Jewish calendar is, or can be simplified into kind of two basic ideas: marking historical moments in which God has saved our people, whether it's, of course, Pesach or Sukkot, but also moments when we invite God into this world and engage God in our lives, whether it's Rosh Hashanah, which is not a historical thing; it's an opportunity to crown God as king, or Yom Kippur to ask God for forgiveness. And the truth is that a lot of the holidays that we have do both. Pesach both reminds us of the time when God saved us and took us out of Mitzrayim, but it's also a holiday where we recognize how we formed as a people, when we became a people, about God's ability to control and create the universe. You'll see more of this come out in the sources. But one of the questions is, if there's a holiday that's remembering a historical moment, in the month of Nisan, God took us out of Mitzrayim, if you mark it then, or like Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, remember the reunification of the city of Jerusalem, you celebrate it then. Well, if you missed that opportunity, you missed it. You wait till next year. It's hopefully not the end of the world. But Yom Kippur, if you miss Yom Kippur, you can still ask God for forgiveness every day. But what happens when you have a holiday, which is both? Pesach is a day when we remember a specific historical moment. Well, if you miss it, you can't honor it later because it only happened on one specific day or a few days of the year. But if it's a day about recognizing God's greatness in the universe, can't we do that any day? So what do you do when you have a holiday like Pesach that's both? Can you have a makeup holiday for it? And that's a question that is asked in this week's Parsha. And what's so fascinating is not only what it says about how we approach holidays in general, but it's really cool because people often ask, is everything, is every question, is every answer in the Torah? And the answer is yes and no. If every single possible legal case that would ever happen in the history of the Jews were in the Torah, how big would the book be? It'd be infinitely large. It'd be too difficult to carry around. It wouldn't have been successful as a religion. Rather, the book gave us the building blocks. God gave us the basic rules and guidance to be able to form and develop a religion. And one of the ways that we know that it's okay to have new questions is the fact that new questions come up in the Torah. There are several cases. The Torah gives us a clear rule that sons inherit the lands when their parents pass away. But the daughters of the men Tzlofchad doesn't have any sons. So the question is, what happens to the property? So they ask a question of Moshe. Or even earlier in the Torah, they get the laws for, they're getting the laws for Shabbat, but they don't have the laws for somebody they know you're not allowed to gather sticks on Shabbat, but they don't know the punishment. It's not written, or it's not given explicitly to Moshe. So they go to Moshe and say, we got this guy on Shabbat gathering sticks together. We think that's forbidden. What do we do? So he talks to God. And that happens again in this Parsha. The question that we'll see inside, and Gloria and Leonard, I'll go ahead and unmute you, is what happens if on Pesach, which is such a fundamental, essential holiday in the Torah, somebody is unable to fulfill it, to eat the matzah, to bring the paschal offering, to eat of it? What do? Did he just miss out on that opportunity? And by the way, in most cases, and this is what's interesting, if I'm not able for any reason to shake the lulav on Sukkot, I've missed an opportunity to do a mitzvah, but I haven't sinned. And that's an important distinction here. There's a difference between I didn't eat matzah versus I ate pork. Now, we're commanded to eat matzah, to shake the lulav, etc., like that. But if for some reason I'm not able to, or I miss, it's out of my control, there's no punishment. I've just missed an important opportunity, especially if it's out of my control, versus if I actively sin, then there's a punishment. But if it's out of my control and I missed an opportunity that's going to come around in a year, what's the big deal? So I already hinted at why it's a big deal. We'll see it again in the second source. But here, this is just fascinating how this plays out in kind of a real world way to show that the Torah is a living document. It's not here are the 10 commandments, end of the story. So Gloria, if you'll please take source number 1, which is from this week's Parsha Beha'alotecha.
The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai on the first new moon of the second year following the exodus from the land of Egypt, saying, "Let the Israelite people offer the Passover sacrifice at set time. You shall offer it on the 14th day of this month at twilight at, at its set time. You shall offer it in accordance with all its rules and rites." Moses instructed the Israelites to offer the Passover sacrifice, and they offered the Passover sacrifice in the first month on the 14th day of the month at twilight in the wilderness of Sinai. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses, so the Israelites did.
Pause there for a moment. So the first 5 verses there, just Pesach. They kept Pesach. So Pesach, ancient holiday, beautiful, no problem. It's kind of a reviewing of the laws, and it's just descriptive of what they did. So Pesach went with them into the wilderness. It wasn't a one-time event. But then, verse 6, please.
But there were some men who were unclean by reason of a corpse and could not offer the Passover sacrifice on that day. Appearing that same day before Moses and Aaron, those men said to them, "Unclean though we are by reason of a corpse, why must we be debarred from presenting the Lord's offering at its set time with the rest of the Israelites?"
So there's 2 things here. One is this, it's talking about tuma, this ritual impurity, which again, it doesn't mean they're dirty. It just means they're in a ritual state in which they are unable to offer sacrifices. And there's lots of reasons that someone might come into contact with a body which is, with a dead body, whether it's a member of the family passed away or they needed to do a burial or they're a war, there's a lot of legitimate reasons. And they said, look, we're not going to have time to purify ourselves. But this isn't our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. This rule was set in place. Why should we be punished? So you can also see here that it's not just a matter of, okay, if you're impure, you just don't offer it. Clearly, there's a recognition here that Pesach is so, in offering that sacrifice, the lamb, is so important. So they say, why are we punished? So go ahead, verse 8.
Moses said to them, "Stand by and let me hear what instructions the Lord gives about you." And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people, saying, when any of you or of your posterity who are defiled by a corpse or on a long journey would offer a Passover sacrifice to the Lord, they shall offer it in the second month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. But if a man who is clean and not on a journey refrains from offering the Passover sacrifice, that person shall be cut off from his kin, for he did not present the Lord's offering at its set time. That man shall bear his guilt."
Excellent. Wouldn't it be nice if when people call the rabbi and they say, Rabbi, I accidentally did this in my kitchen, or Rabbi, this is going in my family, what's the ruling? And I could say, stand by, let me just check with God first. It'd be really nice, the authority there. But he basically says, let me speak to God. And there's this incredible description of Moshe going into the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, and putting on this kind of mask on his face. And he goes into this sort of meditative state when he's having these prophetic direct conversations with God. Obviously, today we don't have that. But again, the point here is that the Torah is an evolving document in relationship with God. And it's quite beautiful. But the answer here is if somebody cannot offer the Pesach sacrifice, and there's more than one reason, impurity, or they're not able to make it in time. And there's an interesting conversation about Pesach, and is it meant to be, a temple-based sacrifice or a home-based? Because today it's a home-based holiday because we don't have the temple. But back then it was a holiday where you had to go to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and then later to the Beit HaMikdash. But they rule that if you're not able to make it to the place where sacrifices are offered, you have a chance to make it up again on a later date, which became Pesach Sheni. And he does point out, though, if someone on purpose saying, I'm not going to do this, I don't believe in the Torah, or I don't care about this, then it becomes worse than missing an opportunity. It becomes a kind of sin, and they get cut off, which is really the worst punishment. It's worse than death. It's worse than getting lashes. It's being cut off from heaven. Their soul doesn't have a place in the world to come. That's bad. So if one has an opportunity to offer the Pesach sacrifice, definitely offer it or eat of it. But again, it's so beautiful here. And what we'll do is we're going to look at the second source, which is we'll look at one quick source here, which is the question of, if somebody goes on a journey, what does that mean you go on a journey? Does that mean I'm 2 days away, I'm an hour away, I'm off the planet? So the rabbis discuss this, and it's just I don't want to say a cute conversation, but it is an important question. So Leonard, if you'll take source number 2, please, in the Mishnah, and how far do you have to be away before it's not your fault that you missed it, and you can make up Pesach on Pesach Sheni, please.
What is the definition of a distant journey? That exempts one from observing the first Pesach. Anywhere from the city of Modium and beyond, and from anywhere located on an equal distance from Jerusalem and beyond, in every direction. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer says, from the threshold of the temple courtyard and beyond is considered a distant journey. Therefore, anyone located outside the courtyard at the time of the Paschal Lamb that the Paschal Lamb is slaughtered is exempt from observing the first Pesach. Rabbi Yossi said to him, therefore, the word is dotted over the letter A in the word distant, Rechoka. To say that the meaning of the word should be qualified, it should be understood that it is not because he is really distant. Rather, it includes anyone located from the threshold of the temple courtyard and beyond.
Thank you, Leonard. So I'll take a step back before I discuss this source. Is today we don't really keep Pesach Sheni, because even the first Pesach we don't really do. Obviously, we eat matzah, part of the mitzvah. We don't offer the sacrifice in the temple anymore. In fact, Pesach Sheni was a few weeks ago, I think May 14th or 15th, and the only significance of it is that one of the prayers called Tachanun, which is supplicating, literally falling before God and saying, God, save me, etc., like that, is not done on days of great joy, a wedding, etc. So we don't do it on Pesach Sheni. But the other thing that the rabbis do here, even when it becomes a symbolic holiday and they're developing the laws for it, is they start to get very lenient on it. And we'll see that, I don't know if we'll see that so much later, but they expand what does far mean. They're saying, look, if you're an Emek Rephaim having a sandwich, maybe not a sandwich because it's Pesach, but if you're 20 minutes away, you forget, you oversleep or something like that, and you miss it, it's not the end of the world. You can make it up on Pesach Sheni. The Torah doesn't seem to be that lenient. The Torah is like, you're impure or you're on a journey. But again, and this could be, and again, we'll see it in the next source, because the rabbis recognized that it was so important for all Jews to recognize Pesach and God's role in the world, that they would find any opportunity to make sure that someone could get it on the first or the second Pesach. Even if somebody decided, the Torah is clear, if you don't do it on purpose on first Pesach, you're cut off. And the rabbis imply that, look, if you don't do it, fine, you can still make it up anyways. Again, that's not what the Torah says, but the rabbis recognize that Pesach is so important that we'll create any leniency to make sure that someone can do it. So why is it so important? So Isabel, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Oops, there you go. You should be able to undo it on your side. And again, this is one of, we use this work a lot because it discusses the meaning or possible meaning behind all of the mitzvot Sefer HaChinuch, 13th century Spain. Again, we're not certain the author. So Isabel, if you would go ahead, please. And he tries to explain why we have Pesach Sheni.
It is from the roots of the commandment, and it is because the commandment of Pesach offering is a powerful and clear sign to all of the creation of the world. For at the time of the Exodus, God, blessed be He, performed great miracles and wonders for us, and changed the nature of the world in the eyes of many nations.
Pause there for a moment. So there's a huge section here where he's basically summarizing the entire Pesach Haggadah and all the miracles, and it's incredible and beautiful. It's very, very lengthy. But one of the things he says is that on Pesach, God showed to the world, and I've talked about this before, that the order of creation is, God let there, Vayhi or, there was light, and then he goes the list building up to humans. And if you look at the plagues, it's almost like God is undoing creation. One of the last plagues is darkness. The order's not perfect, but essentially God says, I made this world, I can unmake this world. And the message is God made this world. Why is that so important? Because for pretty much since the Greeks, and perhaps even a little before that, there was this debate. And the Greek philosophers also debated about this. Was the universe created or did it always exist? So for the Greeks who say, and I don't remember which one fell on which side, Aristotle versus the others, but if the universe was created, great. God fits into that model perfectly. But if the universe has always existed, or it's just something that developed naturally, then God doesn't really fit well into that model. So for the Sefer HaChinuch and the sources that he's quoting, Pesach is so important because it's not just about gratitude towards God, it's about recognizing God is the creator of the universe, and one who doesn't celebrate Pesach essentially rejects the very basis of our faith. And by the way, the beginning of the 10 Commandments, where we accept God's Torah, starts with God reminding us of what happened on Pesach, or what Pesach reminds us of. So everything, our entire religion, our philosophy, our belief in God, everything revolves around what must have happened on Pesach. That is why, according to the Sefer HaChinuch and those he bases himself on, Pesach is the most important thing. Everything rests on us accepting Pesach. That's why it's so important that you get a second chance, because if somebody doesn't accept what we profess on Pesach, that God created the universe, and therefore we keep God's Torah, then you're basically rejecting the whole Torah. So Isabel, after the ellipsis, where it says this is the firm pillar, this is where he picks up and talks about, again, why it's so extremely important.
This is the firm pillar of our faith and our Torah. For people who believe in the eternity of the universe have no Torah and no share in the world to come. This thing is well known, and there is no need to elaborate on well-known matters. Therefore, it was his will, blessed be he, to allow every man in Israel to merit in this important commandment, that an accident or long distance not impede him from fulfilling it. Rather, if trouble will occur to him and he is prevented in the first month, and he do not do it with the earlier ones, he may do it in the second month. And since this is a fundamental principle of our religion, the obligation even extends to a convert who converted between the first Pesach and the second, and so too to a child who reached maturity between the two Pesachs, that they are obliged to offer the Pesach Sheni sacrifice. See Mishnah Torah, Laws of Paschal Offering.
Excellent. So as I said, the Torah gives a fairly simple thing. A man who is obligated, usually on behalf of their family, so the women eat it as well. But a man who doesn't do it, God gives a second chance to make it up. But it's saying here, what about a child who became 13 after Pesach? They weren't obligated the first time. Therefore, they really aren't obligated, like they're becoming 13 now. They're obligated for next year. But it says no, even they can do Pesach Sheni, or even somebody who converted again. If Pesach is over and I wasn't Jewish at the time of Pesach, or I wasn't a 13-year-old boy, I didn't miss any opportunities. So how can I make up an opportunity that I didn't even miss? And this goes back to how fundamentally important it is. Everything is central. Pesach is central to absolutely everything. And he goes on, or earlier in this piece, again, he talks about even somebody who misses it on purpose, we're still going to give them a second chance. And then he goes on to some interesting details about, so Pesach Sheni, how much is it like Pesach? Can we eat bread and stuff like that? And he says it's just about offering the Paschal sacrifice and eating of it. It's none of the other rules. It's just, and he describes why that. But again, the essence here is that this is so important. This is so valuable that we give somebody a second chance. And we don't. And in fact, that the rabbis, again, extend this so that they are, usually it's people it's out of their control. they're on a journey or they're impure. But the rabbis really do extend it to someone and say, look, you made a mistake, but we still want to give you a second chance. It's so important, and this is the key. And you'll see why I'm focusing on this idea for the final source. Even though you were not part of our community the first time around, being part of the community is so important that we are going to go out of our way. God went out of God's way to make sure you could still be part of the community. And the rabbis extend that. We need to bend over backwards to make sure you are part of the greater community. And I'll repeat that. And again, you'll see why in a second. We should bend over backwards, go as far out of our way as possible to make sure that you can be included in the nation of Israel, because it is so important to accept and be a part of the greater whole. So before we go on to the final source, are there any questions up until now? Excellent. Oh yeah, Gloria, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Please. I just have to click on your side.
So you're
Yes.
saying the only obligation is to do the sacrifice, that they don't have 7 days to eat matzah?
Correct. So I don't remember, I was reading the exact detail. When they eat it, they might eat it with maror and perhaps even with unleavened bread. But all the other stuff of Pesach is not included on Pesach Sheni. Because if it was, even though we don't eat the actual Paschal sacrifice today, but if the other mitzvot were true, then perhaps we wouldn't eat matzah on that day. Although Pesach Sheni is really only for those who missed the first opportunity. And again, it's the positive thing. It's an active thing to do versus not eating leavened bread, which is don't do it. So somebody who can't make it to the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, to eat the Paschal sacrifice because they're in Timbuktu, they don't have to eat matzah when they're there. So they can keep most of Pesach. So if they eat bread and they're on the other side of the world, they will get punished because they actively broke Pesach. This is about making up for something they missed. But again, the message, and again, you'll see why I'm emphasizing this, is it's so important that we go out of our way to make sure everybody can be included in this. So why am I emphasizing that? So what Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach, has become for at least a few decades now, for a number of years, has become this general idea of second chances in all things. It's become a symbolic holiday. It used to be a legal holiday, with significance for those who weren't able to offer the Paschal sacrifice, but it's become a symbolic holiday today for second chances and for including people who might have gotten pushed out of the community. So I found this excellent piece. It's actually from a blog called Kavana. So, and the author is an Alan Brill, a teacher and I believe a professor. And he just does a great little summary here of what Pesach Sheni has become to so many people. And I love this idea. I think it's beautiful, and I fully support it. So he says in his blog, and he actually wrote this in 2010, and then 2018, I think, revisited the piece and made it, I think he said, 8 times longer. So I didn't do that one. I did the shorter original one because he says the same basic point. It seems that before our eyes, Pesach Sheni is becoming a holiday of second chances, of no one to be excluded from Israel, of confronting the other. So again, some of those ideas that I was trying to push that may not have been in the original sources. They probably weren't in the original sources, or they weren't intended in the original sources, but you can see how we get this idea out of it. In the 1920s, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson taught about how no simple, unlettered Jew is far from, it's a blog, so there's plenty of typos. No Jew is far from God. In contrast to the rigid hierarchy of Lithuanian Jewry, he developed the Lamed Vavnik stories of burning hard as the Lamed Vavniks are these 36 hidden Jews, and the world rests on their souls. And as long as they're out there doing good deeds, the world continues to exist. A burning heart is more important than cold intellect. And Pesach Sheni is a second chance for all those who are far away, is a noble message for an era of immigration and dispersion. Simple Yidden, however, went out of fashion in the post-World War II era. So he's talking about Jews who are just literally very far from Judaism, which is, again, that image of Jews who are too far to offer the Pesach Sheni. And he's talking about these Jews who are hidden, they're far from their Judaism. There's always a chance to come back. And then in the continuation, he talks again about another Chabad rabbi. In 1978, the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson held over the teaching of Pesach Sheni as a second chance. Pesach Sheni gives those who did not offer the Pesach sacrifice. And by the way, it's not just that he finds Chabad to have a beautiful teaching. This whole movement of Pesach as a second, Sheni as a second chance, was really started with this piece. It picked up by both the Reform movements, by other denominations. It really goes back to this piece in 1978. This is really when the idea of Pesach Sheni becoming a day, a memorial day, almost a holiday just for second chances, really started with this piece in 78. Pesach Sheni gives those who did not offer the Pesach sacrifice the first time the opportunity to do so a month later. Its message is that nothing is irretrievable, that a Jew can always rehabilitate himself, which this rabbi, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, probably bases off Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. One clear lesson from Pesach Sheni is that a Jew need never give up hope. In the words of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the idea of Pesach Sheni is that nothing is irretrievable. We can always rectify our behavior. Even one who is ritually unclean or who is on a distant journey, even willingly, and again, that the rabbis add that, can still rehabilitate himself. A Jew is intrinsically good, his soul a part of God above. This is a concept I think you hear with a lot of Hasidim about the Pintel Yid, is that it doesn't matter if a Jew has nothing to do with Judaism, they're still fundamentally Jewish. There's this spark, and it's a beautiful idea inside of them. Go to any Chabad rabbi and ask them about the Pintel Yid, and they'll float 3 inches off the ground and say, "I'm glad you asked about that." And it is a beautiful idea. A Jew is intrinsically good, his soul a part of God. Sin is completely antithetical to his nature. If he does transgress, it is an aberration that cannot touch his essential self. And this idea, which is reflected in Rambam and Maimonides, is the idea that fundamentally every Jew wants to do mitzvot. They want to be close to God, but things get in the way. So this is a theological, philosophical position that not everyone will agree with, but there's lots of basis for this, that no matter whether someone keeps kosher or not, if they're Jewish, their soul yearns to keep kosher, but for whatever reason, life led them on a different path. But given the proper opportunity, they'd love to get back into it. So someone misses Pesach, it's not because they're evil and they're sinful, it's just something else forced them, even if they think it was their decision, it wasn't. It was some other force of nature forcing them to go away from it. He may be temporarily unclean, but he is of the loftiest levels. Thus, no sin, no omission of service to God is irretrievable. Again, the person is still fundamentally good. You just have to get him back on the right path. A Jew can always return to his real identity. But about 2 years ago, and this piece is in 2010, so he's talking about 2008, not long ago at all, we see a combustion. This is now a time when all those who need a second chance have their holiday. Almost any metaphor of 12-step, broken pieces, shattered lives has made its way into Pesach Sheni Torah from all sorts of kiruv and self-help sources. So he's claiming that in the early 2000s, there was really this huge adoption of people making Pesach Sheni. And by the way, I was actually talking to my cousin yesterday who works for the, I believe, Women's Jewish Council, or the Jewish Women's Council, which is an incredible organization, Jewish women supporting Jewish women. And right after that, I was looking up Pesach Sheni, and I found an article from Jewish Women's Council about Pesach Sheni and about second chances and giving everyone an opportunity to be included in the community. So I didn't look at the data of that source, but he's saying here that if you look at articles about accepting people who are outside of the community and how important it is to include them, whether it be criminals, which I know Chabad, that was a big thing for them. People have gone to jail, as there's still always a second chance. Or he'll expand who he includes now, but whoever they are, everybody gets to be in, and we should go out of our way to make sure everybody is in. He's saying this really took off as an idea in the early 2000s. Last year, he continues, there was a widely circulated blog post discussing it as a holiday for GLBT. Now, you may be used to, what's the order, the acronym, LGBTQ, the order, the acronym. Alan Brill is talking about sources from Israeli rabbis, and that's why the letters are probably different there, or maybe it was different a number of years ago, exclusion. And he mentions, or in addition, Rav Cherlau gave a Pesach Sheni talk on the need to confront the other, and this year on the need to accept gays in the community. So Rav Cherlau, if you move to Israel, go to his shul. He's a modern Orthodox Israeli rabbi and just truly a rock star. It was either 30 or 300,000 opinions that he's answered online. He has multiple published work. He's one of the rabbis. You say, Rabbi Dinan, who do you look to in the modern Orthodox world for opinions? I look to someone like Rav Churlau, and he gave a talk, and a little before 2010, and saying these are people who have been pushed out of the community, and they need to be part of the community, and we need to bend over backwards. Now, he makes it, this is not the class today, he does make a distinction between certain forbidden acts between men and homosexuality. He says, we're not talking about that. That he still holds as forbidden. But in terms of accepting people for things that are explicitly or that are indeed beyond their control, it's not their control, their physical desires, we put that aside and we still bring them in as Jews who need to be part of the community. So you see that even in the modern Orthodox world and in the general world, this idea is becoming very universal. Pesach Sheni and second chances. Finally, this year, Kolech proclaimed it a day of inclusion of all. There's a social reality of exclusion, needing homilies of inclusion, and a reality of therapeutic Torah. And what he's saying is, look, the idea of people being pushed out of society is too widespread. And we need Torah. We need explicit examples in the Torah that prove to us that we should go out of our way to include everyone we can. And Pesach Sheni not only fits that model very well, but that is exactly what it has become. So the truth is that Pesach Sheni almost has nothing to do with Pesach anymore. Again, it was an opportunity in the Torah for people who missed giving the Paschal sacrifice. But even early on, we saw in the Torah itself that God wanted his people to be able to celebrate it. And in the rabbis saying that this holiday it's so important, we cannot let anyone miss this opportunity. So the seeds for the idea of second chances were there. And now, again, as Alan Brill has said at least 10 years ago, it says exploded, and it continues. So Pesach Sheni for most places is a day you don't say Tachanun, but it's also in many communities become a symbol of everybody deserves to be a part of the community, whether they did something wrong, whether, criminal, etc., or whether it's just who they are and it's out of their control. And the Torah opens the door for both. You're on a journey, you're impure, it's not your fault. And the rabbis expanded to people, even if it is your fault, it doesn't matter. We want everyone to be a part of the community, and there's always space for a second chance.